Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Jonathan Fowler, who is a spokesperson for UNRWA, who joins us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Jonathan, great to speak to you and to get a UN perspective. We were just speaking to a retired Major General from the Israeli army. Let me start by asking you, though, why have these 169 aid organizations called for an end to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation?
I mean, what they're saying is what we, the rest of the humanitarian community, the actual humanitarians who do the job of work of humanitarian aid around the world have been saying since this idea was first conceived and since the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation became operational, which is that this system, this scheme, if you like, is providing nothing but, starvation and gunfire to people who are in desperate need of humanitarian supplies. I mean, people are dying, people are being injured, and it's breaching all principles of international humanitarian law, and it's not even, operating at the scale required to bring in the necessary amount of aid. It's a solution in search of a problem in a way, and it's actually making the situation worse. So, I mean, we echo the call from these major humanitarian organizations, the likes of of Oxfam, Save the Children, the Norwegian Refugee Council, people like that, big hitters from the humanitarian sector who said this has to stop because it's not doing the job of work.
What should replace the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, in your opinion?
Well, we just need to go back to what, I mean, obviously, first of all, we need a ceasefire. I mean, I do want to emphasize that. But I mean, the war must end, that's the bottom line. But what we need to get back to in humanitarian terms is we need to get back to the kind of operation at scale that was helmed by the United Nations system during the ceasefire, which, proof of concept. I mean, this is what we do around the world, not just in Gaza. We're able to massively hike the amount of aid that gets in to humanitarian zones because we have this operational model which works. So, the alternative is there staring us in the face. I mean, it's us, and it's what we were doing before, and we should just be allowed to do our job. That's all.
Is the UN and are you and your teams ready to step straight back in again?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got huge amounts of aid, sitting there waiting to get in at a moment's notice. I mean, I'm speaking here from Jordan, from the Jordanian capital, Amman. We've got UNRWA warehouses here, which are full of supplies. I mean, I was recently in one of our warehouses. We've got food, we've got blankets, we've got medicine, we've got enough supplies for 200,000 people for 1 month. I mean, that's just part of what's needed to get into Gaza, but that's just in one warehouse that I was able to walk around in Amman. And yet this stuff is sitting here because it's not allowed in by the Israeli authorities.
What is the latest you're hearing about the current situation on the ground in Gaza? How's it evolved in the last week or 10 days?
I mean, it's desperate. I've spoken to you before, and I often say I run out of words to describe this. I think I have got to that point now. I mean, dystopian is an understatement. Put it that way. It's absolutely shocking. I mean, the levels of malnutrition. There are child amputees. The fact that water systems have been knocked out. They're not functioning. There's no fuel allowed in. So pumping stations. We're down to in our clinics, our primary healthcare clinics, we're down to only half the medicines that we need. All of the things everywhere you look, and then these forced displacement orders, people constantly having to pick up and move because they're in, Israeli designated no-go zones, it's like nothing is being done to improve the situation. This is the point. And then this supposed humanitarian solution has come along and it's given people a stark choice. It's like a Hunger Games situation. And that really is shocking.
What diplomatic or legal action should be taken in your view? And maybe the UN is already pursuing this, but I mean, basically, who would you like to hear or see doing what with regards to the situation and with regards to the GHF in Gaza?
I mean, As we've said, this is not an alternative to a proper functioning humanitarian system. So, I mean, we just need to get back to being able to do our job of work. But, there's different vectors for international pressure, international support. There's constant appeals from the highest level in the United Nations system for us to be allowed to work, for aid to be brought in at scale, all of these things. That's just the UN. But then, individual member states, groups of member states, campaigners, voices calling for change. The point is the change has to happen. And that is down to the decision makers who've decided not to allow aid to go in the way that it should do. There have been all kinds of moves over the course of this war. For example, certain countries turning to the International Court of Justice, that sort of thing. I mean, there's different vectors for this, but the key thing is that there has to be a sea change in the approach from the State of Israel. That's what it comes down to.
We've just been speaking, as I said, to a retired Major General in the Israeli army who says that all the food aid until the GHF came along was just falling into the hands of Hamas. He also said that UNRWA and other UN agencies simply provided cover for Hamas. What do you make of that?
I mean, the polite response is that there has been absolutely no evidence for that. And that's not just us saying that. The former US negotiator from the previous US administration has said on the record that there was never anything even suggested in private discussions that he had with the Israeli authorities to suggest any kind of aid diversion. So, then we hear these things like all the aid is falling into the hands of Hamas. I mean, that is complete misinformation. I mean, it's rhetoric. It's a rhetorical device. We get accused of all kinds of things. Again, no evidence is provided. We have the United Nations has total chain of custody of the aid that it was bringing in, from when it came in right through to the hands of the people to whom it was being given. We knew exactly to whom we were giving aid. We know who we serve. People are registered. There is no evidence whatsoever for any kind of systemic diversion of aid by Hamas or any other militant groups. What we see, of course, is anarchy. We see chaos because of the complete collapse of law and order, the sort of social meltdown. So there's elements of criminality. There are all kinds of people who want to get their hands on a very valuable commodity. That's aid. And the point is that is so valuable because it is so scarce.
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep asking you these questions, but we get told one thing by the Israelis, and yet, as I was just saying to my previous guests, they're not letting journalists in, so we can't verify any of this for ourselves. I did suggest that journalists be allowed in to Gaza, and then we could verify and find out for ourselves. Again, the Israeli military denies its soldiers are firing or are ordered to fire on civilians at these aid centres. I mean, are you hearing reports to the contrary? I mean, what are people on the ground telling you specifically about the sorts of situations in which gunfire is fired at people waiting for aid at these centres?
I mean, we hear all kinds of reports. What we know and what we hear, including from international doctors who've been sort of in and around those zones, is that at least 500 starving people have been reported killed and nearly 4,000 injured. There is clearly something horribly wrong with what is happening. I'm also, of course, very aware of the recent reports in the Israeli media with soldiers, speaking to credible media, saying that they either did things or, some say they received orders. The point is stuff is happening. The question is, why is it happening? The context in which this so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and putting the name humanitarian in something doesn't make it humanitarian necessarily, but the context in which it is functioning is creating the environment for these kind of repeated tragedies. That's what we know, that's what we see, and this is why this has to stop.
Do you see a situation in which the UN comes in to lend some of its expertise to the GHF and perhaps work alongside them, or is that out of the question?
There's no reason for the United Nations system to work hand in hand with something which breaches international humanitarian law. We have a tried and tested system, has operated for decades around the globe, involving all kinds of different agencies. It works in natural disaster zones, it works in war zones. Why reinvent the wheel and create a wheel which frankly isn't even square, isn't even round rather, a square wheel. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's there's always the possibility of complementary systems. There are NGOs that do their thing, have done their thing in Gaza, just as there are NGOs, for example, that work in other zones, war zones and disaster areas around the world. The point is that there's no reason for us to work hand in hand with something which doesn't follow basic international humanitarian principles. I do want to remind your viewers that the original CEO of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation actually quit on the eve of its starting operations, saying that he was not in a position to guarantee its respect for international humanitarian law, including the principles of humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence. I mean, that says it all.
Okay, well, we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, as always. Jonathan Fowler, spokesperson for UNRWA, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.